They say life doesn't ask for your permission before throwing you a curveball. But that afternoon, standing with my hands dripping wet in the utility sink of Grayson's bistro, I wasn't ready for one. I was scrubbing rust off a steel bucket when I heard footsteps behind me. Sharp, measured, expensive. I turned, still holding the steel wool, and saw him. Elliot Grayson, my boss, owner of the most prestigious restaurant in New Orleans. Rarely seen, always composed. I'd worked there for over a year, and we'd barely exchanged 12 words. But now he was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed like he had all the time in the world. 3 months' salary, he said casually. Tax-free. I blinked, unsure if I'd misheard. I'm sorry, sir. What exactly are you asking me to do? He smiled, small, deliberate, unreadable. Your name is Caroline, right? Caroline Bennett. I nodded slowly. Well then, Caroline Bennett, I'd like to introduce you as my fiancée, just for one evening. The steel wool dropped from my fingers into the bucket. I'm sorry, what? I'll triple your monthly pay, and you'll be treated like royalty, head to toe. My heart kicked against my ribs. You want me to pretend to be your fiancé? He nodded again, calm as ever. It's for a wedding. A friend's. He's forgotten where he came from. A little reminder might be good for him. I gave a nervous laugh. And you think I'm the woman for the job? Actually, yes. He paused, then added with a wry smile, You're the only one who said yes. I stared at him, stunned. Wait, this isn't a joke. He shook his head. No joke. I need someone who doesn't come from his world. Someone who'll make him stop and think. I clean your floors, Mr. Grayson, I whispered. I don't even own a dress. You'd be surprised, he said softly. There's more to you than you think. I wanted to say no. I should have. But something tugged at me, like a whisper in my bones. Maybe it was the way he said it, or maybe it was the flicker of something familiar buried deep inside me. Something I hadn't touched in years. I had spent 10 years wondering who I really was. A woman with no past, no memories, only a name a kind doctor gave me. Maybe this wedding wasn't a job. Maybe it was a door. There was one more reason too, though I didn't admit it even to myself. I wanted to be seen. Just once. Not as the woman who scrubbed bathrooms at dawn, but as anyone. I'll need help, I said quietly. I don't own a dress, or shoes, or anything really. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a sleek black card. This covers everything, spa, salon wardrobe. My assistant will coordinate it all. I hesitated, then took the card with trembling fingers. So this is a paid vacation? You are. Full benefits. Starting now. He gave me one last nod and turned to leave. When the door clicked shut behind him, I sat down on the supply closet stool, still smelling of bleach and pine oil. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I caught my reflection in the small mirror behind a box of gloves. Under the worn bandana and tired eyes, I saw her, a woman I barely knew. A woman who once wore something other than sadness on her face. I leaned in and whispered to my reflection, Let's find out who you used to be. 10 years ago, I woke up in a hospital bed with no name, no memory, and no one waiting at my bedside. The doctors called me Jane Doe. They said I'd been in a crash. My car had veered off the road, slammed into a tree, and caught fire. They didn't know who I was. There were no documents on me, no phone, no purse. The vehicle was a rental, signed under someone else's name. I was wearing a red dress and a wedding ring, but no one came looking. I should have died. In fact, I did, at least officially. They took me to the morgue, covered my body with a sheet. A paramedic later told me that when he tried to remove the ring from my finger, he felt a pulse. Faint, but there. He said the diamond on that ring was so large, it could have paid off his student loans. But I didn't care about the diamond. I couldn't remember who gave it to me. To this day, it's the only thing I have from that life. I kept it hidden in a small velvet box beneath my mattress. My only clue, my only anchor. They tried everything: news reports, missing persons databases, fingerprint databases. Nothing. Like I'd been plucked from the earth and dropped here without a trace. I didn't even know what I looked like. When they gave me a mirror, I studied my own face like it belonged to a stranger. My features were symmetrical, my hair thick and dark. But nothing sparked. Not a flicker. Then Dr. Samuel Whitaker stepped in. He was the one who fought for my hospital bills, who kept me from being transferred to a state facility. A gentle-eyed man with grief behind his glasses. A widower. A father. A man who saw something in me worth saving. He gave me a name, Caroline Bennett. He said it sounded elegant, rooted, familiar. And when he told me, "You don't belong on the streets," I believed him. It was his daughter, Rachel, who helped bring me back to life. She was barely 20, bright as sunshine and stubborn as hell. She brought me clothes that didn't smell like bleach. She painted my nails while telling me about college crushes. She taught me how to use a fork again when my hands still shook. And slowly, the fog began to lift. Not the memories. Those remained stubbornly locked away. But I stopped feeling like a ghost. Dr. Whitaker found me a job at Grayson's Bistro. Floor mopping, bathroom scrubbing. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well. And best of all, it let me disappear. The place was upscale enough that no one paid attention to the cleaning crew. I moved like a shadow between the tables and candlelight. But even in that quiet, strange things began to happen. My fingers would tingle when I walked past the grand piano in the dining hall. One night, I sat down, and my hands moved with a confidence I couldn't explain. Music poured out of me like water. I wrote in perfect cursive without thinking. I spoke French in my sleep. Rachel used to tease me, "You write like a duchess." I would stare at the mirror in my apartment, at the woman with high cheekbones and sad eyes, and whisper, "Who were you?" But no answer came. After a year, I stopped asking. After 5, I convinced myself she never existed. I was just Caroline. Quiet, invisible, unimportant. I called Rachel the moment I stepped out of the staff room, still holding the black card Elliot had pressed into my hand. I hadn't even changed out of my cleaning uniform. "Hey," I whispered, voice shaking. "I need your help." She didn't ask why, just squealed. "Oh my God, you finally let him ask you out." "What? No, it's not like that." "Wait, what is it then?" I hesitated. "He wants me to pretend to be his fiancée. For a wedding." There was a pause, then a soft, stunned exhale. "That is wildly inappropriate," she said, "and completely glamorous. I'm in. I have 3 days. I'll need 3 hours." And just like that, the transformation began. Rachel took charge like she'd been waiting her whole life to play fairy godmother. She dragged me through a whirlwind of appointments, spas where women in white robes treated me like I was royalty, nail salons that soaked the bleach out of my skin, hair consultations where stylists ran their fingers through my hair and said things like warm gold undertones and soft texture with movement. At first, I couldn't stop flinching. Every time someone touched me gently, I braced for a slap from reality. When the boutique assistants offered champagne, I almost cried. But Rachel kept me grounded. "You're not faking anything," she said firmly. "You're just walking into the version of yourself the world tried to bury." The dress was the last piece. We were in a boutique in the Garden District, surrounded by mannequins draped in silk and satin, when Rachel pulled a gown from a hidden rack. Ruby red, backless, a slit that whispered scandal. I blinked at it like it was a spell. "This one," she said. "I could never, you could, and you will." I tried it on. The fabric slid over me like water. When I stepped out of the dressing room, Rachel's eyes welled up. "You look like the woman you were always meant to be." I turned to the mirror, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't look away. The woman staring back at me had high cheekbones, soft lips, hair like honey in late afternoon sun. She stood tall, elegant, dangerous. She didn't look like someone who scrubbed toilets for a living. She looked like she belonged. That terrified me more than anything, because a part of me believed it. A part of me whispered, maybe this is who you've always been. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my apartment, the ruby gown hanging from the closet door, lit by the flicker of a candle I rarely used. Milo curled beside me, purring like a lullaby. I ran my fingers through his fur, staring at the ceiling. What if this was more than a role? What if this was a chance? A memory waiting in the wings? What if the woman in the mirror wasn't a costume, but a clue? The morning of the wedding, I sat perfectly still on the edge of my bed, hands clenched in my lap. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Even Milo had gone eerily still, watching me from the windowsill like he knew something was coming. When Elliot arrived, he knocked once, then let himself in. I stood in the hallway, already dressed in the red gown, hair pinned, makeup light but deliberate. I could feel the silk against my skin, the slit swaying with every breath. He froze when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled, voice low. "You're stunning." I looked down, flushed. "You paid for all of this. Don't sound so surprised." "I paid for the dress," he murmured, stepping closer. "Not the way you wear it." The wedding was held at a lavish estate just outside New Orleans. Pillars wrapped in white roses, champagne towers, string quartets echoing over the garden. It looked like something from a dream or a nightmare. People turned when we entered. I could feel their stares trailing across my skin, curious, envious, confused. But not one of them looked at me like I didn't belong. Then I saw him, Nathan Bellamy, the groom. He was standing near the photographer, one arm around a woman, so pristine she looked carved from porcelain. Savannah, I assumed. His fiancée. He was laughing at something the photographer said, carefree, relaxed, until he turned, until his eyes met mine, and everything stopped. His smile faltered first. Then his whole expression drained, color vanishing, jaw slackening. He stared like he was looking at a ghost, or a sin returned to haunt him. I felt it too, a spark deep in my ribs. Not a memory, not yet, but something older. Recognition. Elliot placed a hand on the small of my back. "Nathan, Savannah, this is my fiancée, Caroline." Savannah tilted her head in polite confusion. Nathan didn't speak. He just stared. I extended a hand, calm on the outside, trembling on the inside. "It's nice to meet you." He took my hand, hesitated first, then brushed his lips against my knuckles like he'd forgotten how to function. His fingers trembled. Elliot raised a brow. "You all right, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." Nathan forced a chuckle. "Yeah, long night, that's all." Savannah narrowed her eyes. "We're in the middle of a photo session," she said flatly and turned on her heel, dragging Nathan by the elbow. But he kept looking back, over his shoulder, at me. The crowd resumed their hum. Music swelled. Glasses clinked. But the air had changed. Like a low-pressure system had settled between the trees. Elliot leaned down and whispered, "Well, that went better than I expected." I forced a smile. "Did it?" He grinned. He looked like he saw his past crawling out of the ground. We moved through the guests. I smiled when needed, sipped champagne, played the role. To everyone else, I was mystery and poise. But inside, my pulse thundered, because Nathan had looked at me like a man who'd buried something he never expected to see again, and now it was staring back at him in heels and red silk. I got home just after midnight. The hallway was dim. My heels echoed against the floorboards as I unlocked the door. Milo usually greeted me, tail curled around my ankles, meowing like I'd been gone for a year. But tonight, nothing. The apartment was too still. The air hung heavy, like it had been holding its breath. "Milo." I called softly, stepping inside. "It's just me." No sound. I set down my clutch, slipping off my shoes. My heart thudded with a strange unease. Something was wrong. Something was off. And then I saw it. In the kitchen. On the table. His body. Curled too tightly. His fur matted. A piece of cord looped cruelly around his neck. Tight, deliberate, unforgiving. His eyes were open. Lifeless. I couldn't breathe. The world blurred. Sound collapsed into silence. I fell to my knees, crawling toward him. My fingers shook as I touched his side, cold. Stiff. Gone. No. No, no, no. I whispered, over and over, voice cracking. Not you. I scooped him into my arms, rocking back and forth on the kitchen floor, as if warmth could undo what had been done. As if love could rewind time. Tears soaked into his fur. My breath came in broken gasps. My chest ached from the pressure of grief slamming into me like a fist. Then I noticed something else. The mattress. Torn. My hand flew beneath it, frantic searching. The velvet box was gone. The ring was gone. My entire past, what little of it I still held, ripped away in the same night. Murder and theft. Cruelty and message. This wasn't random. This was calculated, deliberate. A message left in fur and silence. When the phone rang, I barely had the strength to lift it. My hands were slick with tears and tremors. I pressed it to my ear. Caroline. Elliot's voice cautious. You okay? You left the reception early. I just wanted to check on you. I couldn't form words. Could barely speak. Can you come here? I choked. Please. He didn't ask why. 10 minutes later, he was at my door. And the moment he saw me barefoot in a red dress, makeup smeared, holding a dead cat in my arms, he didn't say a word. He just stepped inside and pulled me into his chest, and I collapsed into him, shattering. We buried Milo in the garden behind Elliot's house. Or rather, he did. I couldn't bring myself to dig the earth. Couldn't touch the cold soil. Couldn't move. Elliot wrapped me in a blanket and held me on the velvet couch as the night curled tight around the windows. He made tea, lit candles, said nothing. I sat there, numb, silent, hollow. And then, the smell hit me. Smoke. Not from the candles. Something older. Burned into memory. I gasped, clutching the sides of the blanket. My breath stuttered. Glass. Shattering. Lace brushing against bare shoulders. Red silk and screaming wind. And a voice, his voice, saying my name. But it wasn't Caroline. It was my name, I whispered, throat dry. It's not Caroline. Elliot looked up from across the room. His eyes narrowed, concerned. What did you say? I turned toward him, fingers trembling against my lap. It's Paulina. My name is Paulina. The memories surged forward like a flood. I saw myself in a wedding dress, not the red one, a different one, ivory lace. I was standing on the steps of my parents' home, laughter ringing through the air, sunlight falling on my father's face. Nathan was there, smiling, charming, lying. We'd been married just hours when it began to unravel. That night, I found him in the den, pacing. His clothes smelled like smoke. Gasoline. When I asked about it, he brushed me off. Just took care of something, he said. But then came the knock at the door. A neighbor yelling. Flames already licking the porch. I ran for my parents' bedroom, screaming their names. Nathan grabbed me, pulled me back, his hand over my mouth. You don't understand, he hissed. They were going to ruin everything. He shoved me to the floor. I hit my head, blood in my mouth. Then, something cold at my neck. A needle. My vision swam. I screamed. He called me hysterical, said I needed to calm down. I kicked him, crawled to the front door, fumbled for keys. He shouted something about control, and you weren't supposed to be awake. I made it to the garage. I took the car, his car, the new one he'd gifted me that morning. My hands were shaking. The brakes didn't work. I flew off the road. Everything went black. When I woke up, I didn't remember the flames. But now I did. Every detail, Every word. Elliot had come closer, kneeling in front of me, his hand on my cheek. "Paulina," he said gently, "I believe you." Tears poured down my face. He killed them. My parents. He tried to kill me too. We're going to make this right. I sound insane. You sound like someone who survived. I broke then, not from grief, but from the weight of being believed. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't crazy. I was seen. Elliot didn't speak again. He just sat there, his hand still on my face, his eyes locked on mine like an anchor holding me steady. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, something in me settled for the first time since the fire. I wasn't Jane Doe. I wasn't Caroline. I was Paulina Caldwell, and I was going to take my life back. The next morning, I woke to the smell of dark roast coffee and the quiet murmur of Elliot's voice in the next room. I followed it like a thread, still barefoot, still wrapped in one of his oversized sweaters. He stood in the kitchen, pacing with a notepad in one hand and a phone pressed to his ear. Yeah, 36 hours of footage. Every angle near her building. No excuses. Yes, I'll cover it. He turned and saw me, offered a short nod, then hung up. "You're awake," he said gently. "Good. I've already got 2 private investigators on it. One's tracking the ownership records of the rental car from your crash. The other's digging into Nathan's financial history." I blinked. "How did you get all that moving so fast?" "I own a restaurant," he said dryly, "but I also invest in people who owe me favors." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "You told me the man tried to kill you. Twice. I'm not wasting time." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small black box. Also, this was delivered anonymously this morning. No return address. I took it slowly, my fingers trembling. Inside, wrapped in a strip of satin, was the ring. The ring. The diamond my mother had given me. The one the paramedic found on my hand the night I should have died. I almost dropped it. Beneath the ribbon was a note. A single strip of paper. Printed in block letters. "You lost." Again. My knees buckled. Elliot caught me before I hit the ground, wrapping his arms around me, lowering me gently to the kitchen floor. "He's taunting me," I whispered. "He knows I remember. He's daring me to come for him." "Good," Elliot said darkly. "Let him. He has no idea who he's messing with now." The next 48 hours were a blur of quiet fury. Rachel brought over a shoebox of old photographs her father had kept. Most were damaged from time, but one of them, a photo of me sitting beneath a tree in a wedding dress, was unmistakable. "I think he always suspected," she said softly, "but he didn't want to overwhelm you. Dr. Whitaker, bless him, wrote a sworn statement that afternoon, outlining my amnesia, my trauma, and the early physical signs of assault he had documented but never fully understood. One investigator traced financial transactions from Nathan's accounts. Hidden beneath layers of shell companies were payouts to a construction firm that had cleared my parents' home after the fire, and a wire transfer large enough to start a franchise business within weeks of the accident. Meanwhile, Elliot's security footage, installed just 2 weeks earlier, revealed a figure in black slipping through the garden gate the night Milo was killed. His face was obscured, but his posture, the width of his shoulders, the faint limp in the left leg, Elliot recognized him instantly. "It's him," he said. "It's Nathan." That moment sealed it. We had memory. We had evidence. We had motive. We just needed a courtroom. And for the first time in years, I wasn't running from the past. I was walking straight into it, with fire in my blood and witnesses by my side. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Marble floors, high ceilings, polished oak benches. The kind of place built to make people feel small. But I didn't feel small anymore. I walked in wearing a navy suit Rachel helped me pick out, modest, sharp, unshakable. Elliot sat just behind me. Dr. Whitaker on the other side. Rachel, front row. I could feel the heat of their support without turning around. And Nathan? He was already seated at the defense table. Tailored suit, gold cufflinks, his hair slicked back like nothing in his world had ever gone wrong. But when I stepped up to the stand, he blinked. Just once. The prosecution laid it out first. The fire, the unexplained crash, the forged paperwork, the financial transactions, the break-in at my apartment, the veterinarian report on Milo, the velvet box, the ring, the footage. The jury listened, silent and still, as each thread connected to the next, until the entire web pointed in one direction. Then it was my turn. The moment I took the oath and sat behind the microphone, the world narrowed. I looked directly at Nathan. I knew him. I began, voice quiet but clear. Not just as an acquaintance. Not just as the man you see in that suit. He was my husband. Gasps echoed from the gallery. Nathan didn't flinch, but the tips of his ears reddened. I continued. We married 10 years ago. The wedding was beautiful, small, intimate. My parents hosted it in our home. My hands tightened on the wooden edge of the witness stand. That night, he disappeared for an hour. When he returned, he smelled of smoke. I asked. He lied. Moments later, the house caught fire. I paused, swallowed. My parents died in that fire. Nathan told me I was hysterical. He injected me with something, locked me in a room. I escaped, took his car. The brakes had been tampered with. I crashed. I was pronounced dead. I turned my gaze to the jury, but I wasn't. I told them everything about the hospital, the amnesia, the years as Caroline, the job, the ring, the cat, all of it. He found me again, I said. And when he realized I might remember, he sent a message. I lifted the note. You lost. Again. He killed Milo. He broke into my apartment. He took the ring, the last piece of my identity, and used it to mock me. My voice wavered, but I held it steady. I am not a ghost. I am not a shadow. I am Paulina Caldwell, and I am done hiding. The defense barely tried. They had no alibi, no refutation of the evidence, no alternate theory. Nathan didn't testify. He didn't even look at me again. He just sat there, unmoved, unimpressed, like this was a boardroom negotiation, not a reckoning. But when the verdict came, his mask cracked. Guilty, on all counts. Attempted murder, arson, fraud, identity theft, manslaughter. The judge didn't hesitate. 35 years, she said. No possibility of parole. The gavel fell. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I breathed. For the first time in a decade, I exhaled without fear. Elliot stood, slipped his hand into mine. You did it, he whispered. I shook my head slowly. We did. As we walked out into the sun, reporters shouted. Cameras flashed. Nathan's name made headlines. But mine? Mine was finally spoken aloud. Paulina Caldwell, survivor, truth teller, and no longer silent. People talk about closure like it's a door you get to shut and lock behind you. But it's not. It's more like a window you finally open, after years of suffocating in stale air. That's how it felt when I walked through the iron gates of St. Augustine Cemetery, clutching a bouquet of white lilacs and wildflowers. I hadn't been here since the funeral. I hadn't really been here at all. Not as Paulina. Not as their daughter. The headstones were simple, elegant, just like they would have wanted. Joseph and Amelia Caldwell, beloved parents, loved deeply, missed endlessly. Someone had been tending to them. The grass was trimmed, the stone clean. A small jar of fresh daisies sat beside mine. I stood there in silence for a long time, letting the wind touch my face, letting the names sink into me, not as tragedy but as truth. I knelt slowly, placing the flowers between the two graves, and I began to speak about everything, the fire, the betrayal, the years I lost, the years I survived, Rachel, Dr. Whitaker, Milo, Elliot. I told them I was safe now, that I remembered, that I finally remembered who I was and who they were. "I'm sorry," I whispered, "for leaving you behind, for not coming sooner. But I'm here now, and I promise I won't let what happened define me anymore." A gust of wind moved through the trees, soft and steady. And for the first time since I woke up nameless in that hospital room, I felt like I belonged to someone again, to something, to them, to myself. A week after the sentencing, I walked into the clerk's office with a single sheet of paper and a heart steadier than it had been in years. It was official now. Paulina Caldwell. My real name. The name that had been stolen from me, taken apart and buried beneath ash and silence. I signed the document and stepped out into the New Orleans sun, the weight on my shoulders finally beginning to lift. For the first time, I wasn't surviving under someone else's name. I wasn't hiding in plain sight. I wasn't disappearing. I was becoming. Elliot met me outside the building with 2 iced coffees and a crooked smile. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Strange," I said, "but good." He didn't ask more, just offered me his arm, and I took it. That afternoon, I moved into his home, not as a guest, not as a favor, but as someone who belonged there. The walls no longer echoed. The air didn't feel borrowed. I unpacked slowly, folding old t-shirts beside new clothes Rachel helped me choose. The ruby dress stayed in its garment bag, zipped up and hung in the back of the closet. I wasn't sure when I'd wear it again, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The restaurant staff welcomed me back with wide eyes and cautious smiles. Some of them had never known I was gone. Others whispered, piecing together rumors. I didn't mind. Let them wonder. I had nothing left to hide. On the morning of my birthday, my real birthday, not the one from hospital paperwork, I woke to the sound of a soft meow and a gentle nudge against my cheek. I opened my eyes to find a tiny ginger kitten curled beside me, wide-eyed and purring like he'd always belonged there. I blinked, laughing through the lump in my throat. "What?" Elliot stood at the doorway, holding a small box with a blue ribbon. "He picked you," he said, "but I thought maybe he'd like the name Milo." I scooped the kitten into my arms, pressing my face into his fur. Warm, breathing, new. "Milo II," I whispered. "King of the house." The kitten meowed in approval. Some nights the dreams still came. Flashes of fire, screams in the hallway, smoke in my lungs. But I always woke up with someone beside me, either a man whose hand never wavered, or a kitten guarding my pillow like a sentinel. I used to be afraid of mirrors. Now I look into one, and I see a woman who walked through fire and lived to tell the story. It was March of '94 when I first saw what death looked like in daylight. I was 12. Snow was melting in patches across the street, and the trains outside our town still made that low mechanical groan that reminded me of something alive and dying. That morning, I remember my father bursting into my room. His face was pale, distorted, his voice breaking as he said, "Your mom, she's at the hospital. She lost a lot of blood. And the baby, they couldn't save her." My heart didn't understand it then. My legs did. They carried me down that cold hallway of the regional clinic, past walls that reeked of bleach and despair. My mother was lying there, pale as linen, surrounded by tubes and soft beeping machines. She didn't turn her head when I called to her. Her lips barely moved. "Nadine," she whispered. That was the name of the baby's sister who was supposed to arrive that spring, the name of the child who never made it home. My father sat on the edge of her bed and gently said, "Sweetheart, they couldn't save her." The way Mom turned to him then, I'll never forget that expression. Not pain, not confusion. It was emptiness. Something inside her died long before her body could heal. "They were too late," she said flatly. "Too late." That moment changed everything for me. I stood there, a child trying to understand grief and failure, and I swore to myself, if I ever became a woman who stood between life and death, I wouldn't let death win. Years passed. The world moved on, but that moment stayed, like a crack in porcelain no glue could ever fully fix. When I told my mother I decided to enroll in nursing school, she tried to steer me toward economics. There's more stability, more scholarships. A better future, she said, gently adjusting the collar of my second-hand blouse. But I had already sent in the application. Midwifery, I told her. Labor and delivery. From the kitchen doorway, my father, Tim Carter, once a respected electrical engineer, now a handyman for hire, smiled tiredly. You won't change her mind, Linda. She's got that look. Just like me. Stubborn as stone. Back then, we didn't have much. My dad had worked every odd job since the factory closed down. He fixed broken TVs, unclogged neighborhood sinks, and guarded parking lots at night when he had to. I think the only thing that kept him going was me. I took the 5:20 a.m. bus every day from our sleepy suburb into the city, whispering anatomy terms to myself under dim lights while sipping coffee I couldn't afford. My classmates thought I was intense. Maybe I was. I never went out drinking or dancing, never chased boys or dreams. You act like you're carrying the world, they used to joke. But they didn't know about Nadine, or the way my mother stopped singing, or the sound a heart makes when it breaks in silence. They didn't know what I had promised, and I wasn't about to tell them. Midwifery school was harder than I thought, and I had braced myself for hard. The first semester hit like a freight train. Double shifts at a diner on weekends, late-night study sessions squeezed between bus rides, and anatomy exams that felt like interrogations. I learned to survive on peanut butter sandwiches and 5 hours of sleep. I didn't complain. Exhaustion was easier than silence. Mom had changed since the loss. She smiled less, moved slower, avoided babies in grocery store aisles. Her grief had calcified, turning soft things brittle. I tried not to add to her weight. I studied at the library to keep our house quiet, left sticky notes on the fridge to avoid small talk. Sometimes I'd catch her standing at the window, staring at nothing, her lips moving to lullabies she no longer sang. Dad, on the other hand, aged like rain on stone. Slowly, permanently. His hands, once smooth from drafting blueprints and running wires, were now calloused, cracked from lime and cement. He still came home with dust on his boots and paint in his hair, humming out-of-tune songs from the 70s, pretending nothing hurt. But his eyes told me he hadn't stopped missing Nadine either. My first clinical rotation was at a maternity ward downtown. I wore a borrowed uniform, half a size too big, and tried not to let the seams of my nervousness show. I fainted during my first birth, literally slid down a tiled wall like a broken marionette. I woke up on the floor, cheeks flushed with shame, to the voice of a senior midwife named Judith. "Happens to the best of us, kid," she chuckled, helping me up. "You gonna run?" I didn't. I walked back in 15 minutes later with my hair still damp from the cold tap and my jaw clenched tight. That night, everything changed. The baby, tiny, purple, screaming, wrapped her fingers around mine with a grip so fierce it made me cry. I'd never felt something so small and so alive. The room disappeared. It was just her and me, breath and blood and a heartbeat that had decided to keep going. I knew then. That was it. My place in the world. After that, the fear faded. My hands got steadier. My eyes sharper. I learned to see what wasn't on the monitor, to hear what a woman's silence was screaming. Judith used to tell me, "You've got something rare, Marilyn. You don't just follow protocol, you feel it. You know when a mother is about to panic before she knows herself." I shrugged it off. I wasn't in it for praise. I just didn't want any more little girls to disappear in the middle of a hospital hallway like Nadine had. By the time I graduated, I had scars no one saw and a diploma that made my mom weep silently at the back of the ceremony hall. My dad brought a half-deflated balloon and a bottle of sparkling cider he probably borrowed money to buy. "To Nadine," he said softly, raising his paper cup. "And to you, kiddo, for giving her a voice she never got to use." I still carry that moment in my back pocket, and the fire inside me burned stronger than ever. Because now, I wasn't just chasing a dream. I was keeping a promise. I met Daniel at a birthday party I almost skipped. It was late spring, right after I'd finished a month of night shifts that left me hollow-eyed and sore in places I didn't know could ache. My best friend, Pauline, begged me to come. Just sit, eat something, pretend to laugh, she pleaded. You look like a ghost, Marilyn. Her dorm room hadn't changed since nursing school. The same faded curtains pinned back by textbooks, the same chipped mugs full of instant coffee. We were adults now, allegedly, but the air still smelled like burnt pasta and lavender lotion. Familiar, safe. And then he walked in. Daniel Pierce, a man who looked like he belonged in a lecture hall or a hardcover book jacket. Tweed blazer, tousled curls, a leather portfolio under his arm like it was part of his body. He had this calm, studied confidence that made people turn toward him without realizing it. When Pauline introduced us, he shook my hand with a warmth that startled me. "You're Marilyn Carter," he said, "the midwife, the one who wrote that paper on psychological thresholds in labor." His voice was low, smooth. I read it, twice, beautifully written. I laughed, awkward, flushed. "You're probably the only one who did." "I'm a historian. Obsessive by nature," he replied, smiling. And that piece, it wasn't just clinical. It was human. I remember thinking, finally, someone who sees more than scrubs and chart notes. The romance unfolded the way stories promise it will. Bookstores, rain on coffee shop windows, long walks where we traded childhood memories like postcards. He sent me poetry, quoted Tolstoy like he meant it. On our third date, he gave me a worn edition of Anna Karenina, first English translation. Every woman should own her story, he told me, not just live it. When he proposed, I didn't hesitate. He knelt in the garden behind Pauline's building, fingers smudged with ink and rose petals. I said, yes, like it was a lifeboat. The wedding was modest but elegant. Daniel insisted on a classical quartet and linen napkins folded like swans. My parents looked out of place among the professors and architects, but they smiled anyway. I told myself I had bridged two worlds, and for a while I believed I had. But the cracks appeared quietly. It started with the job. "You've worked enough," he said. "You're a wife now. Rest. Learn to make a home." I thought it was romantic. A man who wanted to care for me. Then it was the clothes. "That blouse is too loud." The friends. Pauline's unsophisticated. The phone. "I worry when I can't reach you. Just leave it on the table, sweetheart." He never raised his voice, never raised a hand, just the rules, one at a time. A suggestion here, a gentle correction there. He installed a home security system for safety, then cameras in the hallway. To monitor deliveries, he claimed. He said I was forgetful, emotional, that maybe I'd be better off with less to manage. He handled the bills, the groceries, the schedules. All I had to do was smile and stay pleasant. Eventually, I stopped answering Pauline's calls, skipped holidays with my parents, wrote thank you notes instead. The house was warm, polished, silent, and I was disappearing inside it. It happened quietly. A missed period, then another. Then one morning, I stood barefoot in the bathroom, blinking at the faint pink lines that formed across the test like the slow unraveling of a miracle. 2 lines. I sat on the edge of the tub, hands trembling, breath caught between a sob and a laugh. I had stopped hoping years ago. Every checkup had ended with the same vague shrugs from doctors. Stress can interfere. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. But it had. I pressed the test against my chest, eyes wet with something I hadn't felt in so long it scared me, joy. Daniel was in the kitchen, brewing his expensive tea and reading Foreign Affairs. I stood in the doorway like a child with a secret, clutching the test in my palm. "I have news," I said. He looked up, eyebrows raised. "I'm pregnant." There was a pause, a flicker I couldn't quite place in his eyes. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "That's unexpected." He walked over and touched my stomach lightly, like it was a painting he didn't want to smudge. "We'll have to rework the guest room," he murmured. "Maybe get rid of those dusty bookshelves." For a few weeks, it was almost beautiful. He brought me chamomile tea, scheduled appointments, made lists of potential names. At night, I lay in bed and whispered to the life inside me like I used to whisper anatomy terms on the bus, softly with reverence. Then came week 8. We were eating dinner. Roasted chicken, white wine, linen napkins, as always, when Daniel set his fork down and said, "Have you considered the risks?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Well, your family. Your aunt had depression, right? And you mentioned once that your cousin had some kind of disorder. And my side, too. Schizophrenia, remember? Genetics aren't forgiving." I stared at him. "Daniel, I'm a midwife. I've helped hundreds of babies come into the world. I know the risks. This is our baby." "That's exactly the problem," he said, voice calm as ever. "You think you know, but you're emotional, Marilyn. You've never raised a child. You barely manage your own schedule." I felt the air thin around me. He started printing articles. "First pregnancies after 30. Prenatal exposure to stress. Neurodevelopmental disorders linked to maternal anxiety." He cornered me in our sunlit kitchen, surrounded by medical jargon twisted into fear. Then came the final blow. A friend of his, a specialist, agreed to see me. "Just to be safe," Daniel said. We went. The room was cold. The doctor never looked at me, only at Daniel. He said something about an abnormality in the fetal heartbeat, a spike in my blood pressure. "Medically inadvisable," he concluded. "We recommend termination." I sat frozen. "I want a second opinion." Daniel placed a hand on mine. "Marilyn, think about the child. Think about the quality of life." I screamed for the first time in months. Threw a cup across the kitchen wall. Told him I didn't believe any of them. 2 days later, I was bleeding. The ambulance arrived fast. Daniel didn't hold my hand. He stood by the door, arms crossed, like an administrator signing off a difficult case. The last thing I remember before going under was the sterile light above me and the way the nurse looked away when I asked if my baby still had a heartbeat. When I woke up, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't pack much. Just a few changes of clothes, my nursing license, some cash, and the photo of my parents on my graduation day. Dad in his worn blazer, Mom in a floral dress she hadn't worn since Nadine. I left the ring on the kitchen table, beside a note I didn't sign. Daniel wouldn't cry. He'd call it irrational, emotional, predictable. It didn't matter anymore. I called Pauline, but her number had changed. So I called the only other person I could imagine showing up without asking questions. Bernice Caldwell. She was a retired nurse I had once trained under. A woman built of cotton and steel, with white hair always tied in a bun and a voice that could calm a birthing mother in the middle of a hurricane. I hadn't seen her in years, but I remembered the way she used to look at me during those brutal first rotations, like she saw something worth protecting. Her voice on the other end of the line was exactly the same. "You come," she said, "no questions. I've got a spare room and a kettle that never turns off." The bus to Mapleford took 6 hours. I sat by the window the whole ride, watching the world blur into green fields and long shadows. I didn't cry. I didn't sleep. I just held onto my bag like it was the only thing tethering me to the earth. Bernice met me at the station in a wool coat 2 sizes too big and a floral scarf, wrapped 3 times around her neck. "You're skinnier than I remember," she muttered, pulling me into a hug that smelled like chamomile and old linen. "That man of yours doesn't know what he lost." Her apartment was small. Books stacked in corners, crocheted blankets on every chair. It was warm in a way that no thermostat could explain. She made tea with lemon and honey, sat me down and waited. I didn't speak for a long time. Then, like a dam breaking, it all came out, the gaslighting, the cameras, the manipulation, the baby I never got to meet. Bernice listened without interruption. When I finally finished, she nodded slowly. "You're not the first woman who's run from the wrong man," she said, patting my hand. "But you're one of the few who did it before she lost herself entirely." The next morning, she handed me a list of nearby clinics. This town's always short on hands, especially good ones. By the end of the week, I had an interview at Mapleford Women's Health Center, a modest clinic on the edge of town. It wasn't much. 2 delivery rooms, aging equipment, and a staff that rotated more often than the seasons. But when I stepped inside, something in my chest shifted, as if the air itself remembered who I used to be. The director, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Lacey Monroe, shook my hand and looked me square in the eye. "We've got more births than beds some weeks. You think you can handle that?" I nodded. "Good," she said. "We need women who don't flinch." That night, I sat on Bernice's couch, holding a chipped mug and listening to the wind rattle the windows. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet settle around me, not like a punishment, but like a pause, a beginning. The first few weeks in Mapleford felt like standing barefoot in snow, painful, disorienting, but somehow cleansing. I worked morning shifts at the women's clinic, mostly handling prenatal checkups and postpartum calls. At first, I kept my head down, did what was asked, avoided eye contact. But slowly the rhythm returned. Palpating bellies, charting fetal heart tones, offering whispered reassurance to terrified first-time mothers. It all came back like muscle memory, as if my hands had never forgotten what they were made for. Dr. Monroe didn't smile much, but she noticed. "You don't panic," she said one afternoon after a complicated intake. "You listen. That's rarer than you think." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure how to explain that listening was the only thing that had kept me alive these past few years. Bernice was the kind of woman who never let silence fester. Each evening, she insisted I join her for dinner, even if it was just soup and toast. "No one heals alone," she said. "Not well, anyway." Her apartment was filled with little domestic sounds, the kettle whistling, the clock ticking, the occasional creak of wood shifting with temperature. These were not Daniel's curated silences. These were living sounds, forgiving sounds. She started leaving books on my nightstand, old nursing journals, poetry anthologies, novels with bent spines. "This one helped me after Ed left," she'd say, or "this one reminded me who I was before I gave too much away." Sometimes I read them. Sometimes I just let them sit there, like quiet reminders that healing didn't always look like action. Sometimes it looked like stillness, like breath. And then there was him, Dr. Andrew Wallace, the hospital's new attending OB-GYN, came by the clinic twice a week for high-risk consults. He was younger than I expected, late 30s maybe, with kind eyes and the kind of calm that didn't need to announce itself. He didn't flirt, didn't pry, just nodded politely and asked thoughtful questions. We didn't speak much at first, but over time we began to orbit each other, crossing paths during difficult cases, exchanging updates in the hallway, sitting side by side during chart reviews in comfortable silence. One evening, after a grueling delivery that ended, well, only by the skin of our teeth, he offered to walk me home. Mapleford was small, and my apartment above Bernice's bakery was just a 10-minute walk down Main Street. The night air was crisp, full of wood smoke and pine. "You're good," he said softly, hands in his coat pockets. "Really good." I shrugged, just trying to stay useful. He paused, then looked at me in a way that felt too steady. "No, you're holding things together. That's different." We didn't touch, didn't make promises, but something shifted that night, not a spark, but a warmth. A small ember, placed carefully where the cold had lived too long. Back at the apartment, Bernice was already steeping chamomile. She raised an eyebrow as I stepped in. "Someone walked you back." I nodded. She handed me a cup. "It's okay, you know." "What is?" "To let someone be kind to you." I didn't answer, but I didn't argue either. It was one of those nights where the world seemed to hold its breath. Late January. Mapleford lay beneath a blanket of thick snow, the kind that muffled sound and bent tree branches with its weight. I was on night duty at the clinic, a rare thing, but we were short-staffed and I didn't mind the quiet. Most of the patients had already been discharged or tucked into prenatal observation. Only one woman remained in early labor, resting with monitors beeping gently at her side. I was finishing my shift notes when I heard it, a sound so faint I almost mistook it for the wind. Then it came again, a low, broken moan, human. I paused, pen midair, ears straining. It was coming from outside. I rushed to the window. Beyond the fogged glass, past the chain-link fence that bordered the back of the clinic, something moved. Something small, slumped near the gate, half hidden by the falling snow. Grabbing my coat and flashlight, I ran. The cold slapped my face the moment I stepped outside. Snow crunched beneath my boots, breath visible in the beam of light cutting through the dark. And then I saw her, a young woman, barely more than a girl, curled around her swollen belly, clothes soaked in blood and fluid, lips blue, eyes wild with pain and fear. Her fingers clutched the frozen ground like she was holding on to the earth itself. Hey, I'm here, I said, kneeling beside her. My name's Marilyn. I'm a nurse. You're safe now. She shook her head weakly. Don't take her. Please. I'm not taking anyone, I whispered. I'm going to help you. Behind me, I heard footsteps crunching fast. Dr. Wallace had followed, still pulling on his coat. What V we got? Preterm labor. Maybe 32, 33 weeks. Possible placental abruption. She's in shock. He knelt beside me, all efficiency and calm. We need to get her inside. Now. Together, we lifted her, barely more than bones in panic, and rushed her through the back door. Bernice was already inside with a stretcher, her face pale, but steady. Room 3, she said. Everything's ready. Everything after that blurred into instinct. Blood. So much blood. The girl, her name was Emily, was barely conscious, whispering something over and over that I couldn't catch. Dr. Wallace barked orders. Bernice pressed gauze against Emily's abdomen. I hooked up 4 fluids with trembling hands, silently begging the monitors to stay stable. Get ready for an emergency C-section, he said, snapping off his gloves. We're out of time. When he handed me the baby, she wasn't breathing. She was tiny, limp, skin bluish-gray, and for a moment, just one, I felt that old helplessness rising again. The sterile lights, the empty silence. Nadine. No. I pressed 2 fingers gently to the baby's chest, began stimulation, cleared her airway, whispered words I didn't even realize I was saying. Come on, little one, come on. And then a gasp, a sputter, a cry. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. She's breathing, I said, almost not believing it. She's breathing. Dr. Wallace paused, blood on his sleeves, sweat beating at his temple. He looked up at me, and something unspoken passed between us. We had saved her, but Emily was already slipping. I held the baby close, trying not to shake. What's her name? I asked, though I wasn't sure she could hear me. Emily's eyes fluttered open just once. Mira, she breathed, and then she was gone. Just like that, I sat beside the incubator for hours, unable to move. Mira lay inside, surrounded by wires and monitors, her chest rising and falling like a whisper. She was impossibly small, 5 pounds, maybe less, but her tiny fists flexed with a stubbornness I recognized. She was fighting. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to survive, but she had. I ran a finger along the plastic wall of the incubator, tracing the curve that separated us. I didn't cry. There weren't tears left, just something tight and heavy in my chest, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Her mother had died without a single ID. No family listed, no emergency contact. All we found was a small sketchbook in her coat pocket, drawings of flowers and children, soft pencil lines of women holding infants in blooming fields. On the last page, scrawled in shaky handwriting, was a name, Mira. My hope. That's how I knew it wasn't a name chosen in panic. It was a name chosen in love. I brought the book home that night and sat with Bernice on her threadbare sofa, flipping through every page like they held a code I was supposed to understand. She named her, I said quietly. She meant for her to live. Bernice nodded, sipping her tea. Most mothers do. We sat in silence for a while, the sketchbook between us like a newborn neither of us could touch. Finally, I whispered it out loud. I want to keep her. Bernice didn't look surprised. She set her tea down, folded her hands. Then we need to move fast. What do you mean? She doesn't have family. No paperwork. No custody designation. If the county finds out, they'll assign her a temporary guardian and put her in the system. No, I said quickly. No, they can't. Bernice leaned forward, voice low. You know how it works, Marilyn. She's legally unclaimed. And right now, you're just a nurse who happened to be there. You want to be more? We've got forms to file, people to convince, hoops to jump through. It won't be easy. I looked down at the sketchbook again, at the little drawing of a sleeping infant nestled in petals. I'm not afraid of hard. Dr. Wallace helped where he could. He had contacts in social services, pulled strings to get me temporary custody while the paperwork was in motion. We worked in tandem like we had in the OR, fast, focused, without needing to speak too much. But not everyone was happy. Zena, the new surgical lead, had been cold to me since I arrived. She didn't like how quickly I'd gained trust. She didn't like how often Dr. Wallace said my name. One night, I caught her lingering near the nursery, watching me through the glass. You're getting attached, she said without looking at me. Dangerous, that. She has no one, I replied. And I was there. Zena's lips curled. And yet somehow, you're the one walking out of that, or with a baby in your arms. Must feel powerful. I didn't answer, but something in my chest twisted. I knew that look, and I knew what it meant. A week later, Dr. Wallace grew distant. He passed documents to me through nurses, stopped making eye contact. At first, I thought I'd done something wrong. Then I realized he was protecting me, because Zena had heard too much, and she was waiting to use it. At first, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that Dr. Wallace was just busy, that the distance in his voice, the way he avoided my eyes, the fact that he hadn't stopped by the nursery once in a week, none of it meant anything. We weren't anything. We had no promises, but I felt it like a door slowly closing and locking from the other side. When I asked Bernice about it, she didn't sugarcoat it. She never did. People like him carry weight, she said. People like Zena, they wait for a slip. Sometimes staying close to someone is the quickest way to see them fall. I didn't respond. I just folded another tiny onesie into Myra's drawer and pretended my chest didn't ache. Then came the knock. It was just after 9, and Mira had finally fallen asleep after another fussy evening. I had been sorting through pediatric paperwork, half awake, half listening to Bernice hum in the kitchen. The knock was firm, measured, a stranger's knock. I opened the door and froze. The man on the porch was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a gray wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp but not unkind. In his hand, he held a slim leather folder. "Marilyn Carter?" he asked, voice low and direct. I nodded, suddenly aware of the heartbeat in my ears. "My name is Daniel Pierce," he said. "I believe you're caring for my daughter." I didn't understand at first. The words made sense, but the meaning didn't land until he opened the folder and handed me a document. Then a second, a photograph, and there she was, Emily, smiling in front of a mural, paint on her hands, belly already rounding beneath a loose t-shirt. Her face was softer, lighter, but unmistakable. "I hired her," Daniel said, 2 years ago, through a surrogacy agency. She was carrying my child. I sank onto the nearest chair. "You're mistaken," I said quietly. "She never mentioned anyone. No paperwork. No contact. She gave birth and died alone. His voice didn't waver. She ran. She left a note the morning she disappeared. Said she couldn't go through with it, that the baby was hers. He paused, and for the first time I saw it, the pain beneath the polished exterior. I searched for her for over a year. Private investigators, legal teams. Nothing. Until last week, when someone in your hospital uploaded a case report with just enough detail to catch attention. Zena. Of course. I looked at the photo again. At Emily's eyes. At the mural of swirling stars behind her. And the tiny caption below written in faint pencil. For her. For Mira. She named her, I whispered. Daniel nodded. That's how I knew it was her. I chose the name. Mira means peace in an old dialect my grandmother spoke. Emily liked the sound. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all pressing into the small room, into the old wood floor and the stale tea on the counter. I'm not here to take her from you, he said at last, but I do want to meet my daughter. Everything in me screamed to say no. But then I thought of Myra's eyes, so green, so full of questions I couldn't always answer. And I realized a door had just opened, not behind me, but ahead. I didn't let him hold her right away, not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't know how to trust anyone with something so fragile again. We arranged a supervised visit at the clinic. Bernice insisted on being there, quietly reading a magazine from the corner. Dr. Wallace passed through once, but didn't stop, just nodded toward me, his face unreadable. Daniel sat across from me, hands clasped between his knees, eyes never leaving the tiny bundle asleep in my arms. I watched him watching her, not with hunger, not with fear, with longing, and something else. Regret. She has her mother's lips, he said quietly. I looked down. Myra's mouth was soft, pursed in sleep. Emily's sketchbook flashed through my mind. Petals, swirls, the way she had written that name like a prayer. She never told us, I murmured, why she ran. Daniel's jaw flexed. I think she was afraid I'd take the baby and disappear, that I only wanted a child, not the connection. And was she wrong? His eyes met mine. I didn't understand back then. I thought biology was everything. But now, I know that showing up is louder than blood. I didn't want to cry, but I did, because somewhere deep in me, I knew exactly what he meant. For weeks, I had watched Myra's chest rise and fall with every breath, her tiny fists clench and unclench with life. I had fed her, sung to her, rocked her through colic and fevers and 1,000 tiny moments that added up to something huge. And none of that had anything to do with DNA. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't beg for rights. He just came again the next week with a book of Russian lullabies his grandmother used to sing. Then again with a handmade mobile of paper stars and moons. Each time he stayed a little longer. Each time I watched Myra's eyes track him across the room. Then, one snowy evening, we sat across from each other at Bernice's dining table. Mira was asleep in her carrier, fingers curled around one of Daniel's old scarves. I've spoken to my lawyers, he said, voice low. They're drawing up shared guardianship papers. You've raised her, loved her. I won't take that away. I didn't know what to say, so he continued, but I'd like to be in her life, not as a visitor, as her father, and if you're willing, maybe we can find a way to do this together. Not just legally, but honestly. The air between us shifted, not romantic, not yet, but tender, open, like stepping into a field after a long winter and seeing something green breaking through the frost. Bernice passed through the room with a cup of tea, paused at the doorway, and smiled softly. Families come in all shapes, she said. Some are chosen, some are built, some are rescued from the fire. I looked at Daniel. I looked at Mira, and I felt something settle deep inside me, a stillness, a beginning. It was Bernice who found it, tucked into the lining of the old diaper bag Emily had clutched the night she arrived. The bag had been buried in the corner of the closet for weeks, used only once, and then forgotten, as if touching it had felt too close, too raw. Bernice brought it to me after breakfast, setting it down on the kitchen table like it held something sacred. "There's something inside," she said softly. "I thought you should be the one to open it." My hands trembled slightly as I unzipped the lining. Inside was a folded piece of watercolor paper, the edges frayed. I opened it slowly. The writing was shaky but deliberate, Emily's. I recognized the same looping are from the name Mira in her sketchbook. It wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. To whoever finds her, if she survives, please tell her I loved her, even when I was scared, even when I ran. I thought I had more time. I thought I could make it somewhere safe before she came. I didn't want her born in fear like I was. I never wanted to disappear. I wanted to become someone better before she met me. But if I'm gone and someone is holding her, please love her without guilt. Let her laugh. Let her be wild. Let her choose her own name for you. Tell her I drew her from starlight, and that I'm not sorry I chose her over everything. Emily, I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit the paper and blurred the ink. I pressed the letter to my chest and sat there for a long time. Later that evening, I walked out behind the house with Mira wrapped against my chest, bundled in wool and soft blankets. The sky was pale lavender, dusk settling in. The old brick kiln behind Bernice's garden still stood, a relic from when the property had been a pottery studio decades ago. Inside the kiln, someone had stacked old firewood for winter. I lit a small flame and held the letter over it, whispering Emily's name, not out of anger, not to forget, but to release, to send it to whatever part of the sky held her now. The paper curled and blackened, ash lifting into the night like a prayer. Behind me, Mira stirred, then settled again. Daniel stepped onto the porch, watching us from a distance. He didn't speak, just stood there, hands in his pockets, letting the cold night settle into his bones the way I had learned to do. We were all survivors of something, and somehow we had chosen to survive together. I don't know what our future looks like. I don't know what Mira will call me one day, or how many times I'll stumble trying to be enough. But I know this. Love isn't just biology. It's not blood or names on a certificate. It's showing up when the storm hits. It's holding on when you're afraid. It's letting go when it's time. And sometimes it's drawing a girl from starlight and trusting that someone else will help her shine.